Hello, my name is Dr. Sainan Ali, and I've been asked by Rosa Ali, who is the subject coordinator and lecturer for assessment across the lifespan, to put together a series of video seminars that relate to the brain. These seminars we're going to call My Brain, Mind and Body. And my role today is to give you some anatomy. Rosa is an expert on the function of the brain and the assessment of the brain and the cognition of the brain, etc. She's a clinical neuropsychologist, so I'm not even going to go there. But being a neurophysiologist and a stress physiologist of some 30 years standing, I think I can talk a little bit about the anatomy of the brain and some functional aspects of the brain. So here we go. Some of you know a lot about the brain, so you can probably tune out right now, but some of you have not had sufficient training in the brain, so this would be important for you. In this subject, as I understand it, assessment across the lifespan, you are going to be administering the whisk and the waste, which tests for various cognitive function or various functions of the brain. So I think it's important that you understand the anatomy of the brain and how the anatomy of this brain relates to the function. When we look at the brain, we have the cerebrum or the cerebral cortex, and we have the left and right, but we're not going to talk about the lateralization of the brain today, but I am going to talk about the frontal lobe. The frontal lobe is largely involved with the executive function of the brain, and from the frontal lobe we can go right to the back of the brain where we have the occipital lobe, and the occipital lobe relates to our visual interpretation or visual processing. We have our temporal lobes on either side of the brain. The temporal lobes are important in learning and memory. And between the frontal and the occipital and above the temporal, we have our parietal lobes. And the parietal lobes are important because they are involved with association and integration of incoming information, whether that be visual, auditory, or somatic sensations. I'm going to split the brain in half and show you a mid-sagittal section of the brain. And when we look at a mid-sagittal section of the brain, obviously we have our primitive brain, which is comprised of the brain stem and the thalamus, and here again is your cerebral cortex. The brainstem contains a number of centers that controls your vegetative functions. Vegetative functions such as your heart rate, such as your breathing rate. Most important thing about the brainstem, as far as we're concerned, is that it does contain a region called the reticular formation, a network of fibers that are responsible for the arousal of the brain. It can turn brain activity up and it can turn brain activity down. And this is important because it relates to attention and concentration in your clients. There's the thalamus that lies right above our brainstem, and the thalamus is the ascending relay station where all information, whether it be auditory, whether it be visual information, whether it be somatic sensations that may arise from the skin, all of that information comes up through the brainstem or enters the brainstem at an appropriate region to the thalamus, and from the thalamus to the various areas of the brain. So let's have a look at one very, very simple example, and that is visual signals. From the eyes, we come directly into the thalamus. From the thalamus to the occipital lobe, and from the occipital lobe, where perception occurs, we move to the integrating area of the brain, which is our parietal lobe, and from the parietal lobe, after the integration, the association, we move to the frontal cortex, where an appropriate action could take place. Same with auditory signals. Auditory signals first move in from the ear to the brainstem, from the brainstem to the thalamus, from the thalamus to our temporal lobe, and from the temporal lobe again to our parietal lobe, where integration, association can take place, and then to the executive frontal lobe, where an appropriate response to that information or that auditory signal could take place. That's all I want to tell you about the anatomy of the brain today. This is just a quick 5-minute teaser. There'll be longer videos that you can view in your own time. There'll be longer videos with specific functionings that I'll be guided by Rosa on, as well as I'm sure Rosa will today hand you out some sheets of paper, and on those sheets of paper I'll ask you to write some questions. Anything and everything that you want to know about the brain, please ask me and I will answer them for you, in addition to our program of seminars that we have for you. Thank you very much.